I'm Juliette Wolf-Robin, National Executive Director of American Photographic Artists, and we're here today with Amy Arbus. It's about time. APA is a not-for-profit association for professional photographers, and we're here to advocate, educate, and elevate the photographic community. As many of you may know, we have a national association, we have regional chapters, we have professional photographers who are the volunteers of all the boards around the country, national and locally. And this one is brought to you by APA New York. I'm here helping out today, but it's an APA New York webinar with something that Debbie Gilbert, who's the APA New York director, has set up for us today. So we really appreciate her doing that and always finding really wonderful, inspiring speakers. So thank you, Debbie. Before we start, I'm going to give you a little update about things that are going on at APA, including the APA Awards. Yay! So right now we have the call for entries. This is last year's book. There's 14 different categories. There's beauty, still life, documentary, conceptual, personal work, architecture. So you can find a category that's right for you. You don't need to be an APA member to join and to be part of this, but we would prefer that you join and you get a better rate on every submission as an APA member. So we appreciate that. We have 16 different jurors that come from all sorts of ad agencies. They're creatives, they're art producers. We have freelancers. We have people from magazines judging. Really the kind of people who can hire you. So really important to get your work in front of them. You could also enter a series of 2 to 6 images in the series category, lots of opportunity. And then we have these really great prizes like a Sony 7R. We have Light in Motion has Stella Pro Reflex Light. Capture One is providing licenses. Think Tank is providing gift cards. Wacom is providing tablets. Found is providing a membership. Blazing Edition is going to print the winning image on metal. Image Rights is going to help somebody navigate copyright and their registration. So really a lot of great prizes. Capture One, did I mention them too? Photo Shelter. I mean, there's just tons of stuff. So, and one entry could get you all that. So definitely worth entering. Plus it helps support APA. So I hope that you'll all enter. We also have some great programming coming up. Debbie has some from New York. We have some from different chapters. APA members, most of these are free completely to APA members, and then non-members, sometimes it's free, sometimes you pay. We have one that's happening on Monday that we have APA members Ann Cutting and Christopher Malcolm talking about their work doing AI work. You can watch that and see for yourself what you think about it. We will have Jeff Sedlick on to talk about the copyright implications. He just spoke before Congress about AI and copyright. So he will be with us on Monday to talk about that as well. So great programming. It's on the events section of National, or you can check any of your local chapters and see what's happening there. I want to remind you how much your membership matters. It really helps support the organization and all the work that we're doing to fight for your rights in Congress and with contracts and other things that are happening around the country. So please support however you can. We have memberships that start at 50 that go up to 500 a year, depending on what kind of benefits you want or if you're emerging or professional. So check that out. And that's what I have. So I'm going to hand it over to Debbie Gilbert, who's going to host, and she will introduce you to Amy Arbus.
And before you go, Juliette, or I know you're not going, you're going to stay here, but I wanted to ask you about that gorgeous magazine book that you held up. Those are the winners from last year. So you're going to be printing the winners of the APA Awards, and it's something like that for this year?
Yes.
And that goes to, you send that out to who?
To people who can hire, all the jurors, obviously, the winners, the jurors, and then we find people around the country who we feel would be interested in hiring these photographers, and we send it out to them as well.
Excellent. That's reason enough to
yeah.
Even though it'd be fun to win the Sony camera, but get in the magazine. Maybe you get gigs, then you can buy your own Sony camera. You don't have to win.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Okay. So let me start by saying I am Deborah Gilbert. I am the Regional Director of APA New York. And thank you all for coming. Before I introduce Amy, I just wanted to do a bit of housekeeping and say that we'll have a question and answer period after Amy gives her talk. So you can write your questions either in the chat section or in the Q&A section. And in the chat section, you'll see Juliet will be dropping a link to enter the APA awards, and maybe she'll be dropping some other links of things that you should see. And I'll be dropping some links in there too. And, you know, if you have questions, you can put them either in the Q&A section or the chat section, either one, and we'll ask your questions for you when we get to the Q&A section. So thank you all for coming. And so how to introduce Amy Arbus. I first became aware of Amy's work back in the 80s. Yes, I'm one of those people who can remember the 80s. And when she was creating this amazing column called On the Street for the Village Voice. And everyone who misses the Village Voice, raise your hand. I still miss the Village Voice. But her work was just striking. And at the time I was working at this now defunct camera store called Olden Camera. Remember that? And I was running the workshops, and one of our regulars, you know, he said, you should get Amy Arbus to speak. I said, I love her. I said, she would never do it. He said, well, why don't you try? All she can do is say no. And so I contacted her and she said yes. And so, and so she came to speak and was terrific. And since then, you know, back then you'd be looking through The Voice and you'd be leafing through it and her pictures would stop you in your tracks because they so perfectly captured the gritty city that we loved so much. And since then she's gone on to publish 5 books. And of her photography, 5 different bodies of work, as well as doing commercial work for major clients, and has had exhibits around the world. And yet she still made time to come and speak to us again tonight. So we're really happy about that. And without further ado, here's Amy Arbus.
Thank you. That was so sweet. I wanted to start tonight by reading a little piece that I think captures the feeling of the 80s. And but I promise not to read through the whole slideshow. Let me just see how to advance. Do I do it with, okay, got it. My second book, On the Street, 1980 to 1990, is a compilation of the style portraits I did for the Village Voice. This series is a social document of a very complicated time. Ronald Reagan was president and Nancy Reagan just said no. John Lennon was assassinated, Rock Hudson died of AIDS, DNA was used as evidence, and Robert Mapplethorpe was censored. But the arts were flourishing. Blondie was singing Call Me, Heart of Glass, and One Way or Another. Lou Reed was Waiting for the Man, Walking on the Wild Side with Sweet Jane. David Bowie sang Let's Dance, Heroes, and Fashion. Cyndi Lauper just wanted to have fun. Prince did Nothing Compares to You, Kiss, and Little Red Corvette. Whitney Houston asked, How Will I Know? And sang I Will Always Love You while she wanted to dance with somebody. George Michael had faith. He knew you were waiting, but he needed you to wake me up before you go. Lionel Richie sang All Night Long, Do It To Me, and Say You, Say Me. The Police sang Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic, Every Breath You Take, and Don't Stand So Close to Me. Michael Jackson was bad, he beat it, and he rocked with you. Elton John was still standing. He sang Sorry Seems to Be the Hardest Word. Queen was Under Pressure, and they were the champions. Spielberg's E.T. phoned home. Spike Lee did The Right Thing. Rob Reiner made When Harry Met Sally. Mike Nichols had Working Girl, and Martin Scorsese made Raging Bull. Meanwhile, I was documenting the style of the kids on the street that Halston, Gucci, and Fiorucci were using for inspiration. It is now 30 years later, and I'm in negotiations to place my archive in an institution so it can be used for research. Okay, I wanted to show a picture that was taken of me during the time I was working for the Village Voice by a colleague, Richard Sandler. And this is on the very corner where I live now. I think he was really going for the skinhead, but he captured me and I must have recognized him. And then here are the pages from the style section for the Village Voice. It came out every 6 weeks and I really loved doing it. And I loved working with the designer and the editor, trying to figure out thematically what pictures to use. So I would go out when I had a deadline and I would just walk around with my camera, not doing much of anything for the first day. And then I would start to see patterns, literally. Patterns in what people were wearing and ideas that they had. Like this guy had divided his head with his eyeliner. I thought it was so inventive. And this is the picture I call the Flip family with their dog, who was their mascot for their store on 8th Street. And this is Phoebe Legere, who is a musician, lives on the Lower East Side, as far as I know. And Suzanne Barsh, who gives parties to this day every month, sorry. And then I love that Madonna got sort of short shrift down in the corner there. But this is one of my best-selling photographs, so it was a great moment. And this was when I ran into Madonna. I asked her, she asked me what I was doing this for, and I said I work for the Village Voice, and she said, "Oh, that's funny. They're running a review of my first record this week." So that was incredible timing for both of us. And then these are the photographs. As you can see, this is completely natural lighting, but I got into using a flash fill technique, not here, but because I was trying to mix the daylight and open the shadows. So this, for example, is flash fill, and you can tell by the hard shadow right next to her. So the flash is literally mounted on the camera. It was very, I didn't work with much gear. I just had a camera, a couple lenses, and a flash. And then this one was at night. I didn't usually work at night, but she was pretty amazing. And there's the picture I call the eyeliner. And I got really interested in looking for locations that mirrored the subject matter that I was photographing. So I thought this was great to mirror the back of her and her own rear view. This is a friend who was pregnant at the time with twins, and we're still in touch to this day. This is the early days of Anna Sui, wearing her own fashion. And this is called D-Train. I was headed to Coney Island, and I never spoke to this person, but because I was working for a newspaper, I made sure to, you guys don't use meter readings, but at the time I needed to use a meter to decide what lighting was down here and how to expose this. And if I hadn't have done that, if I hadn't have been concerned that it wouldn't print well in the newspaper and overexposed it, I wouldn't have gotten this gorgeous blown out window. And to me, that's what makes the whole picture. So it's fascinating to this day what you do and why, and how little that affects, you know, how without that you wouldn't have gotten as good a result. I call this the diaper family. Also direct flash. She's standing pretty close to the wall there. There's a reflection in her glasses. Somebody asked me if I dressed my subjects, and I was like, I wish I was that clever to have come up with a purse that looks like an animal, a car ring. She's got a tape measure around her neck. These are little hearts, and amazing. Not everybody loved my pictures like Debbie does. Some woman moved away and wrote a letter to the editor of the Village Voice and said, now I know, when I look at Amy Arbus's picture, I know why I left New York. So there you have it. This is called High Hairline. She had just gotten her hair cut at Astor Place, which is known to be a barber for men. And this guy, it was not like most of the people I photographed, but he was in Central Park, and I just thought it was clever exercise wear. I did go back and make a film about these folks many years later, and I was in touch with this woman, Robin. So it was fun to see them all these years later. These pictures get a lot of play. People are very interested. I mean, most of these people are really notable at this point. And so I recently got a request for this picture for use in a magazine, which is nice that they still have a life. And it was because Andre, the guy on the left, is a clothing designer. So it was nice that they wanted to publish an early picture of him. And this is Joey Arias, who still does drag singing in New York. He's got an incredible voice. This was someone I met at Studio 54. And down in the East Village. These guys are partners in work and in life, and they are set designers for movies. And this is the band The Clash. And I knew they were in town because I was excited to hear them. And I was walking from where I lived on the Upper West Side down to the Village, and there they were. And I was trying to figure out why they were all just hanging out there. And it turned out that they were going to be in Martin Scorsese's movie, not the one that I mentioned, but King of Comedy. And I'm really glad I got this picture because they were almost entirely cut from the film. So it's nice to have a recording of this moment. And these are the Rosenberg twins. They look even more different now. And there she is in all her glory, wearing a stained coat and carrying a bowling bag and wearing clogs. And she said, I still have my pajamas on. And all these years later, during the pandemic, somebody got in touch and wanted a picture of them that had been used in the Village Voice. And I said, well, I'm going through everything now. Let me see if I can find it. And she said, you know, I never told you, but Madonna was wearing my coat. We were both dating Jean-Michel Basquiat, and he and I had an argument, and I left without my coat. And then in the newspaper there, I saw her wearing my coat. So this is the series that I did initially, just a personal project, but I ended up doing it for New York Magazine. So they hired me to photograph the plays in previews because they were going to do a review that would come out as the play opened. And the idea was to take the actors out of the context of the play, in character, in costume, and photograph them as though they were real people. And this woman, Christine Ebersole, got herself a dog that her character, Edie Beale, had. The woman she was playing in life had the same dog. That's taking method acting to a new level, I think. And this is a friend, Lydia, and they were doing a production of Hedwig and the Angry Inch in Scotland during the Fringe Festival. And I went and had such a great time. And they were switching roles so that they, you know, a man and a woman playing the opposite. So it got very confusing. And this is Sweeney Todd. So as things come around, they go around. So that's now on Broadway again. And this was Coast of Utopia. And The Child Catcher. And this woman did the most amazing Judy Garland. I was really blown away. It was a little scary, actually, that she seemed so much like her. And this was the original Color Purple. Oops. That's Ed Harris in a play called Rex, W-R-E-C-K-S, but it's a double entendre, sort of like the title of this talk. And if you ever have a chance, he did reprise it, so I don't know if he'll ever do it again, but it's a pretty amazing play and a beautiful performance. I'm spacing out the name of this show, but it was, as you can tell, beautifully styled. And this is Mark Rylance in Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. And I'm forgetting this play's name. These were all done from 2004 to 2008. So it's a while now. But my theory was that all these actors were going to be in film and TV, and sure enough, that's been the case. So this was Caroline or Change. And Liev Schreiber playing Eric Bogosian in talk radio. This was about Toulouse-Lautrec. It was Belle Epoque, and it was directed by a dancer, so it was sort of a mood piece. It wasn't really a narrative so much. And this was an Edward Albee play called Seascape, and the idea behind the play is that there's a couple on land, and this is a couple underneath the sea, and they come out of the sea and meet the other couple, and they're both having the same problems in their marriage. And Elizabeth was pregnant at the time, and I sent her a photograph, as I do with most people, and she said that she hung it over the baby's crib. I got a little concerned that it might be too scary. Fred, this was a matinee performance, and I think it was the last day that they were performing, and he came out of the stage door in Schubert Alley, where everybody is on matinee days, holding a transistor radio, listening to the ball game. And I thought, oh my God, I just missed the shot. Sutton Foster in maybe Frankenstein? I'm not sure. And the amazing Alan Cumming. This picture was not made for the fourth wall, but it was done for the New Yorker many years earlier. And it's the cover of my book. And it fostered a really nice friendship between the two of us. And he's just an amazing, super kind, generous, socially conscious guy. So it was a pleasure getting to know him. And I did these pictures to examine the similarities and differences between paintings and photographs. And it actually was really fascinating, not just to get these images that I was really happy with, but I learned all sorts of things about perspective and dimensionality and lighting that I would have never discovered any other way. And we were working with at a background studio, and these were all painted backdrops. And we would pick the correct, the closest one to the photograph, to the painting that I wanted to recreate. And we would style the clothing, we would get jewelry, and then we would paint the talent. And as you see, we did some shading on her back. But the effect is that the unpainted parts, like her eyes, jump forward, and the painted parts tend to recede. So it's kind of like reds come to the fore and yellows go to the back. And I used all kinds of, you don't have to do this anymore, but this was early in digital for me. So we used, other than the paint, we also used lighting gels so that I could have mixed lighting in one piece. was before I knew how to do it in post. I was also a purist at the time, which I have to say I'm not anymore. But for example, this is all lighting and gels. So this is Picasso's blue period. And my pictures are totally different than the paintings, but they're certainly reminiscent. And this is a Balthus. I loved doing the casting and, you know, deciding with the stylist what would be right. And I loved interpreting the colors of the face. Like this one was really hard because the colors were so off. This sort of mustardy color, and then we shaded her, and it was different than this color. And then there were the two kind of muddy blues and this painting in the background. So, and oh, we painted the hair on, and then she also had a wig. And I took a lot of liberties with my version of the paintings. For example, this is a Cezanne and a self-portrait, and I loved the way eyelashes looked painted white. So we did that instead of what he had done. So this is his real hair color. And then we matched it with this and matched the background with this. And this was all in the background. And this guy is a, what do you call those roller skates that are blades, roller blades. So and a dancer, so he's pretty fit. And this is the new work. This I literally just started, but I'm totally into. So there was a circus, a traveling circus nearby, and I went with a camera, and they were very gracious and said, take all the pictures you want. And I just had a field day. And I started looking for the moments in between, which is a theme that I've used before, particularly with the infants. I don't know if you know those pictures, but I was looking for what I call upbeats. And this to me is a metaphor about life. You know, this guy is hanging on for dear life, and this guy is like holding him up, but you know, like whatever, not even paying attention. And I just loved that finger is so hilarious. Not to mention the lighting and the perfectness of what she's doing. And then the amazingly graceful moments as well. This was amazing. These guys are basically breakdancing in the air. And the only thing touching the ground is his elbow. And again, unbelievably graceful. And then all of a sudden she looks sort of like a frog. And these guys are completely insane because they're doing the sear wheels, but the wheels are traveling around in space. So it's completely insane what they do. It's incredible. So they come off the ride, as I call it, and they're completely breathless and dripping with sweat. So that's it for now.
Hey, Amy, thank you. That was terrific. Fun, as I told this to you, you know that I'm so excited that you're photographing circuses now, because some of you may know, I used to be in the circus. So I love everything circus. So I can't wait to see the project when it turns into a book. I'm assuming it will turn into a book. Which brings me to a question actually that I had. You've done all these books. When you do this, do you create a body of work with the idea from the start that it's going to become a book, or how do you do that?
Yeah, not always. Like my first book, No Place Like Home, was commissioned, but On the Street I was doing for the Voice, and then was eager to publish it, and it took, it took till 2006 to get it published. So that's 16 years. The Fourth Wall, I wasn't sure anybody was actually going to publish that, but the people I worked with for On the Street were interested. So that was like the perfect venue for me, because they had a designer that I adore. So that was great. After Images, I literally just did that for myself, but I did find a publisher who was interested. This, I just want it to be a book, because I think it would be a gorgeous, I think, first of all, there's a need for it, because I don't think circus performers have been celebrated as much as they need to be. I mean, I've done a little homework on what books are out there, and it's kind of crazy how little information there is. So I wanted to do it. I think it's a historical story. It's a social story. It's all colors and all, it's a really tough job. And I think it doesn't get the kind of celebration that it needs. So.
Is it going to have interviews as well, or a story about them, or what is your thought?
I haven't gotten that far. I definitely will write a piece about my experience doing it, but I haven't figured out who should write it. I think that would be, that's the kind of thing I'll find out as I'm working on it, is like who could do, either I could interview them or they could interview me, or somehow we could talk about those things I just mentioned, which are fascinating to me, and how long people stay in circuses, and the families that are all in the circus together. It's just a fascinating thing. It's no longer an American book, because I'm going to Montreal for a circus festival. So it was originally just going to be here, but it might be North America.
You should end up going to the Circus Festival in Monte Carlo. That's like one of the finest in the world. I'll get you the information.
She's there.
This would be great, because as one of my pet peeves is people keep referring to politics as a circus. I think, no, if it was a circus, they would be highly skilled and talented people all working together, not working against each other. So that's a circus. But you mentioned your book designer, your book publisher has a great designer you love. When you're doing a book, how much input do you have with image choice, sequencing, design, all of that?
It depends on who you're working with. In that case, I was super lucky, because Greg Wakabayashi, he works with Howard Greenberg now. So he does like mostly earlier photographers than me, mostly black and white. He's just, I think, the best. He happens to be Hero's son. And both he and his brother have carried on the love of photography by designing and running a publishing company. They sold it, but excuse me. But it was called Welcome Books.
Are you somebody who collects photo books? Is that a love of yours, is photo books?
Yes, and my bookshelves are constantly falling down.
Uh-huh. And do you have a preference? Like when you look at photo books, is there something in particular? Is it the quality of the printing? Is it the storytelling? What attracts you to photo books?
I do love a great concept, meaning a great story, not a highfalutin concept, just I noticed the book of last year's winners was beautifully reproduced. Yeah, that's hugely important to me. The reproductions, the paper. I love size is important to me. It doesn't have to be big. In fact, I used to joke that Richard Avedon's autobiography, it was written on the cover AUTO/biography. And to me, it was 8 pounds of book. And I said, you mean the car book? Because it was just so heavy.
Yeah, when you think about going out book signing with that.
And FedExing copies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lori asked a question in the chat, and she asked, let me find her question here. Where is it? She wanted to ask about, approaching people, like when you were doing your street photography, or now if you're still doing it, were you hesitant at first to approach people? Did you have to get used to it? And how do you, approach people on the street,
I think I was initially shy, but once you got to me, Debbie, I became a total ham in front of people. Yeah, I'm initially shy. Same thing when I'm talking in front of people. But I've done it so much now that I'm kind of a ham. I like it. First of all, when you approach people on the street, there's nothing really to fear except that they say no. I mean, you might get your feelings hurt, but that's not so serious. The big thing is to have radar for who is going to give you a hard time and just not get involved. But I had a great reason to make pictures. People wanted to be in the Village Voice. That was helpful. I don't do it now, but I'm very shy at the circuses, but that'll change. That's just because I just started. And now that I'm reaching out to people beforehand, it'll be much easier. I think just, I guess I treat people the way I want to be treated. They won't always treat you that way, but and I'm genuinely interested.
And a lot of the people you were photographing then, there was an edginess about the city and about the people you were photographing. So I'm curious, like now looking at New York City, do you feel that there's an edginess anymore, or like what style of imagery represents photographing New Yorkers now?
I don't think about it that often. Honestly, I'm not there now. And I don't know how to answer that question. I find people watching is still fascinating in New York. There's no question about that. But I think what you're getting at is that there's an edginess that's missing. And I've felt that over the years at times. Like, I remember thinking, oh, everybody's wearing, Banana Republic or, something like that. But that's not true. People are really still inventive. They're just not quite as punk.
Yeah. You mentioned doing that film of some of the subjects years later. Have you ever thought of doing, a then and now of still images of some of those classic pictures?
I did, and I didn't think they were interesting.
They've all gone suburban or mainstream or something.
There was nothing wrong with them. It was my photography that didn't have the same power.
Mhm.
Some of them were, were leading really conventional lives, but I didn't care about that. I was fascinated in how people changed, and still, and always am. So when
Is
I
your
did-
style, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was
Is your,
just going to talk about the infants and watching them grow up. That was super fun, but I don't think I did interesting pictures later. You really have to get over thinking that every picture you take is going to be great. I spent the last 4 years not being inspired, and it was really deeply upsetting. And I am just so jazzed to be loving photography again.
One of the questions I had on my list was what keeps you inspired. So I guess you had a period where you weren't, but now you're back.
Well, I was traumatized by COVID.
Yeah.
Because it was too similar to 9/11 for my taste. I live 2 miles from where 9/11 happened in New York, and I just was, I just have PTSD. So that was really hard for me, and I also wasn't inspired. And even when I came up with ideas of photographing closed store windows and marquees and empty streets, and I just couldn't make a picture that I was really excited about. So yeah, it's terrifying.
is your process with people, are you collaborative? Are you looking for them to also play with you, or are you into directing what you want?
I prefer to collaborate, but with strangers, I don't expect to. I love collaborating. And that's why those same actors I used for after images I met during Fourth Wall, and I just loved working with them. And they were visually, they could change a lot, so I could use them for a lot of different characters without feeling repetitive. And I loved working with them. They knew exactly, we had a shorthand. I would say something and they would know what I was talking about, and it was just magic between us. I love that.
Years ago, I remember Richard Avedon did a course at ICP. Where you were in that, right? And
Yes.
what was that like, and what did you learn from that?
Oh my God, I just wrote about this. Do you mind if I read it?
Sure, that's what a coincidence.
That was queued up nicely. Well done, Debbie.
Richard Avedon taught a masterclass at his New York studio through the auspices of the ICP. It was February of 1992. Avedon looked at 250 portfolios and chose 16 of us to be in his class. He said we were the best of the worst. I took this to mean that his praise would be hard won. During the first meeting, we were asked to describe a photograph that would be a self-portrait. 8 of us described a person in water. Then, as a homework assignment, we were asked to make a self-portrait. So I decided to make a portrait of myself in the bathtub. It wasn't until my toe touched the water that I realized that the deeper reason I was there was because my mom had died in a bathtub 21 years earlier. While I was taking the photographs, I was thinking about what it must have been like for her and how it might have been for me. In some of the pictures, I look like I did at 17. My pictures were unlike most nudes that tend to be romanticized. These were raw and unflattering. I didn't want to show them to my peers, but when I brought them into class, Avedon had them enlarged and hung on the walls so that they completely surrounded us. And then this goes on. I was also asked, what would be my self-portrait in words? So I'll read that too, because I think it's personal and interesting. I had a very happy childhood until my mother's death. I was a young and innocent 17-year-old and was so shocked by her death that my memories in the following 10 years are almost entirely gone. Consequently, I was developmentally behind all my friends, particularly in terms of relationships. I think that's part of the reason I've been single most of my life. Despite my successes, I've always felt that the people around me were smarter than I was. As it turns out, that just isn't true. Because I was loved before I suffered my losses, I'm surprisingly well adjusted. At this point in my life, I love my work, my dog, my family and friends. I'm not nearly as innocent, but I'm probably as happy as I was when I was a kid.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's very personal. Didn't expect that, but thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I know we have a couple other questions. What's the best advice you got when you were starting out your photography career? And did you take the advice at the time, or did it take a long time for you to realize that was good advice?
Well, I had a teacher who's a wonderful photographer, Bill Burke, at the Museum of Fine Arts, the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And he said, so the year had gone by, and he said to me, how do you feel it went? And I said, well, oh, he said, you never take any pictures. How do you expect to get better? And I said, well, I'm afraid to take bad ones. And he said, you better see a shrink and get over that really fast. And I took the advice. I saw a shrink and I got over it.
Did you ever feel when you were getting started that you were, competing with your parents who were photographers?
Somebody with no manners said early on, I don't know, I might have been less than 30, said to me, well, you're not as good as your mother.
Ooh.
And I thought, that's not fair. And really, you're going to say that to a human being? Nice. But literally 2 years later, I woke up one morning and I said, wait a minute, nobody's as good as my mother. I think I can live with that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's shocking what some people will say. That's, I guess, it's like anything in the arts. You have to have, I don't know if nerves of steel is the right thing, but you have to have the strength to withstand often rude criticisms.
You have to believe in yourself. And I think that comes from how you were raised. I don't think that's something that I found later. I think I was loved and appreciated. And I think that really helped me in my moments of doubt.
So, did you have more questions?
Well, I just want to say, I think it's part of the challenge of people getting portfolio reviews, right? It's like, if you go to present your work to someone, what they're looking at it from their lens in the advice or suggestions or thoughts that they might give back to you. And you have to decide if what they're saying is true to you or not, because it may not be relevant, it may not be applicable. And to decide what they say that you actually want to take with you. Do you ever, somebody was asking, do you ever give portfolio reviews? Do you look at other people's work?
I've done it. Yes. I don't seek it out, but it does interest me. I mean, I love photographers. I'm teaching a workshop here in Provincetown, Massachusetts, on July, the third week of July, I forget the exact date. And I'm going to be working with people talking about what makes a great portrait. So that's kind of like portfolio reviews, but it's also teaching.
Mm-hmm. You've done workshops over the years in different countries. Have you seen any change in what people are either looking for, or what they are seeking, or what they're asking, or what they're looking to do? Are you noticing any changes in trends of what people come to look for in the workshop?
It's such a great question, but another one that I don't think I can answer because I'm not up on it. The last time I taught was at ICP right before the pandemic, so I'm a little out of it.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if I don't know. I'm always wondering what people want to do next when they're doing a workshop, and so it'll be interesting.
I love, part of the reason I've loved working at ICP all these years is that people come from all over the world and they have ideas that Americans just don't have. Mm-hmm. So I find it really inspiring. I just think it's great. Yeah, I had a couple of students that I really loved, and then a few that weren't working, which is terribly frustrating for a teacher.
Are you, early on, were you in the darkroom with your images, or did you send them out, or how involved were you in the process?
Very involved, probably because I didn't have any money when I was started out. So when I was working for the Village Voice, I did all my own film processing and printing. And it's actually kind of great because I made really beautiful prints that they were too nice to be reproduced in the Voice, but to have these gorgeous prints from way back when is lovely at this point. So yeah. I'm really glad I did that. And I'm
Liz is asking, what advice would you give to emerging photographers?
Again, another sort of stumper question, because I don't feel like I'm an expert in that right now. I mean, emerging photographers, I don't know. I mean, I've always been a little gun shy about the question about how do you make a living as a photographer, because I barely did, and I think it's just gotten harder. So that's always stumped me. But it's the thing about not getting discouraged. I think that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
And also you need to be a great editor. If you can't edit your work, there's no way you're going to succeed, because that's what it's all about. It's all about finding the best one.
Yeah. And I guess to not be too emotionally attached to cut an image out of a collection.
Exactly.
Even a great image may just not fit with that particular collection, may have to go in another collection.
Exactly.
Well, I will ask you this. Juliet, did you have any more questions?
I have a ton, but I'm going to stop.
Okay,
because I could just, I mean, I just, because it's just like, there's so many things I'm interested in, but in the span of what we're trying to do, which is you presented your work, and I'm good. I really greatly appreciate your.
I didn't want you to not ask any more questions. I just
no. It's just life. I feel like we should sit and have coffee and that sort of thing.
Happy to.
But I was going to ask you, what does photography mean to you? Another big philosophical question.
Well, you know, for me, it was it gave me access to the world. So I could talk to anybody if I was wearing a camera. Without a camera, I would be a wallflower. You know, I was very shy as a kid. I would stare at people. And I think I became a photographer partly to commune with my parents when they weren't doing it anymore, when my mom was gone and my dad had become an actor. And also partly as an excuse to stare at people because I find them so fascinating. Photography is absolute magic. I never get bored. I get frustrated, but I never get bored. I find, and like now I am so interested in those things that go by so quickly when someone appears to be falling, or you know, when someone's in midair. I find that so compelling. So I think it's a pretty magical medium. And I was very terrified when I thought I had no more to say with it. That was a very sobering thing. And I was trying everything, like every art, you know, painting, drawing, pottery. I was like, gotta find something else.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I mean, you have such generosity of spirit to share so much of yourself and your work. And oh, someone just put something in the chat from one wallflower to another. Thank you. I think a lot of us are that way with photography. It helps us. It's sort of like having a drink at a cocktail party. You really don't need the drink. You just have to have something in your hands so you don't feel socially awkward. But thank you for your generosity of spirit in joining us this evening. And you should join us at a crit sometime when we do crit and people show just a few of their images and we do something. But this was such a treat, and I'm sure there are lessons in here for everyone who was here. And what can we say? Just thank you so much. We
Thank
really
you very much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.